All right, so we're going to continue on to part two. So the next part of this video. If you didn't watch the first part, this won't make a lot of sense. So make sure you go back and watch part one. So we've already kind of curated this list of what's going to become a list of tables for us. Now, if you wanted to, you could manually create the create statements to create this table, right? To create all these tables. They're not that complicated, right? It's not a very huge list, right? So you could go through this. You could say, okay, I know I'm going to have a main table. It's going to have a value column and a label column and probably an ID column so that there's something unique. And then these are the values that I'm going to put in for those columns. So you could do something like that, right? And that'll certainly work fine. But instead, I'm going to do this with a SQL script, right? Or not a SQL script, I'm going to use a scripting engine to do this instead. So my first step is, and so, the first thing I'm going to try here is, we have to read in our file, right? We have to somehow read in this file. Now, in my case, my file is going to be in my PA4.1 folder, right? So I have a directory called home, directory called student, and then I also have a PA4.1, and then in there will be my college scorecard other tables.csv. I copied it into my server, and if you haven't already done that, I'll show you how to do this. We come back over here. So I'm going to put my file, it's going to be college scorecard. There we go. I just hit tab to auto-complete it. So that's going to copy it into my server, right, using SCP. There we go. So now I've got it on the server, so I can work with it. Okay, so back over here. So I'm going to read that file in, the college scorecard other table.csv. The next step is I want to create something that I can use to work with that table, right? And the easy way to do that in PHP. So PHP supports arrays. If you haven't taken a programming class, that's okay. But basically, we use an array to store rows and columns just like we do in a database, right? So here's a little snippet of code that I just found this on the internet somewhere, right? Basically, I'm going to pass in the file name, right? And also this command that goes and creates an array out of it, right? So array map is a function that creates this two-dimensional array. It's an associative array, essentially. But basically what this is going to let me do is loop through all the records in my CSV. So here's my CSV. It's going to basically take each row one at a time, and it's going to read it into a loop, and I can work with these individual columns to do something with it. So I can reference these values with these individual column names, and then I could do stuff with it, right? Which is what I want to do. So if I come back over here, so for it's going to create this variable called CSV, right, which is just an array, and it's going to just basically build this whole array, right? So I can work with it. Once I have that, right? So once that whole thing exists, now I have to do something with it, right? So let me copy another little snippet of code here. I'll explain what this is doing. So in here, first I create a variable called other tables. This is going to be where I'm going to hold the information about these other tables that I'm creating, right? And basically what I'm going to do is for each record in my CSV, so here's my CSV. So every row in my CSV, it's going to give me a key and a value, right? So I'm going to have the key, which is essentially which row number it is, right? So K is basically what row number am I on, which isn't very useful, right? I don't really care what row it is, right? So, which row I am at in this list is not really terribly important. But what is important is I have all these different values, right? So this is going to read in, the $V is going to contain all the different values. And what I could do is I could get the variables within those values to do something with them. So for each one, it's going to create a new record set, right? A new set of rows and columns where one is going to be the variable name, and then it's going to set the comment to whatever's in the developer friendly name field, as well as the name of data element. And if we go back and look, let's go back and look at this. So it's going to use the variable name is the table name, and then it's going to set that using the developer friendly name, and then also me expand this out a little bit here. The name of the data element, right? It's going to combine these two because this has more information, right? So that'll help me kind of figure out what this is all about. Again, the comments are all about giving us extra information, right? All right, so back over here. So that's going to be the comment field. Then it's going to populate the list of values, right? So for each one of these, I'm going to have a value. It's going to have an ID and it's going to have a value, right? And that's it. So these are going to be my list of all the values that that I have. So I'm basically creating two different columns. I'm creating a column called ID and a column called label, and it's going to create and it's going to have the ID and the label, right? And the ID and the label basically are going to be my value and label. So the column value is going to become the column ID in my little script, and the column label is going to become label in my little script. Each time I go through this, I'm just going to increment n. I start with 0. I'm just going to increment it. And I just do that in case I want to do any debugging. I can break it after I get, so that way I don't have to go through the entire list, right? All right, so that's the little snippet of code that is going to basically create my little table, right? Next step is I have to create my insert statement and my create statement, right? I want to create a statement that creates the table. And then I also want to create a list of insert statements for each one of those tables. So the first thing I'm going to do is this is just going to be a string that we're going to generate, right? So there's my string for create table and for insert into those other tables. And let me just put a snippet of code here, and I'm going to explain to you what this is doing. All right, so in this snippet of code, so for each record in other tables, it's going to give me the name of the table and the attributes about that table, right? So it's the name of the table and then the attributes. And then as long as the table name is not blank, right? Because if the table name is blank, then I don't want to do anything because it's not going to be valid, right? It's not going to give me, a valid create statement. I'm going to create other tables, right? So this is basically a string, right? So it's a string that I'm just concatenating to it. I'm using \n basically is adding a new line, right? And hopefully this isn't much different than any other scripting language if you've learned Python or if you've learned Perl or JavaScript or whatever, or even the shell scripting in Linux. There's these mechanisms exist in all these different programming languages. I'm just using PHP because it's easy, but so I'm going to create a table, right? This is my create table statement. That's my table name. I talked about earlier how I want my table name to be lowercase. So it's going to convert this to lowercase, right? So it's going to be in lowercase. Then I have my parenthesis that's going to open up my list of columns. So I have my, whatever the table name is, _ID for the column. It's going to be an integer. It's not null, right? And then I have a column called whatever the table name is, and then value, right? That's going to be a varchar 1024 because I don't know how long it's going to be. I just made it huge. And then I'm making the primary key, whatever that ID number is, that's going to be my primary key, right? So just two columns, and whichever is the ID is going to be the primary key, the table name ID. And then I ended off with making sure I tell it's the InnoDB engine. The default character set's going to be Latin, and then I'm going to add a comment, which is going to be whatever's in the comment field that we already set up here, right? We set this comment field. It's going to do down here. It's going to make sure that's set in the table. Then down here, it's going to create my insert statement. So what's that going to look like? It's going to be, first it's always going to start with insert into whatever the table name is that I created up here, right? So it's going to create that table, and then it's going to basically be the table ID, right? So these are my two columns, right? So first in my insert statement, I need my two column names, and then I need a list of values, and I get those values by another for each loop. It's going to go into whatever the values are, and it's going to iterate through those, and it's going to get me the ID. If the ID is numeric, then it's going to go ahead and create it using the numeric ID, right? That's going to be my ID number. And then I'm doing a replace over here because sometimes these labels contain a single quote. and we can't have a single quote inside a statement. You have to either escape it out so that the database engine isn't trying to process it, or um, you have to get rid of it, right? So in this case, I'm just going to get rid of. I'm going to take a single quote, replace it with blank, and that's it. And then that's going to be in that value. So when I run this, at the very end, I'm going to trim off any trailing commas at the end. Um, that way, I don't have those extra commas. And then I'm going to put a semicolon at the end, and that should be it. So that's going to build my inserts. So once I finish that, right? So once all that is done, what I could do is just echo $create other tables, right? So that's going to show me those create statements. And then I could do the same thing with my insert statements, but let's start with the create and see if that looks okay. So let's come back over here. So now that I've done this, at this point, if you're not using Notepad++, you'll have to take what I've typed here, right? Hopefully you pause the video and you put all this stuff in here, and you've got it all spelled right. I'm going to probably put a copy of this in Blackboard so you have it, these different snippets. But in any event, you're going to copy this up to your server so you can run it from the server. You already have the CSV file there, right? So if I run PHP, actually it should already be in here, DB script, let's see what happens. Look at that. It's like magic. It worked, right? It generates all of my create statements. They're all here, right? This is great. It's exactly what I want. All those create statements ready to go. So here's a table. There's it's all lower cases, which I wanted, and I have the uppercase a column name, but underscore ID, and I have again the column name, but underscore value. It's all ready to go. This creates my primary key, so they're all in here. This works great. The next thing I'm going to check, just to see if it works too, is let's come back over here. We're also going to echo inserts, right? So let's take a look at these insert statements and see how they look. All right, so I'm going to come back over here. Look at that. Insert into, there's my table name, there's my columns, and then my list of values, right? That's exactly what I want. So that's working good. So far, so good, right? So now if I basically from PHP, now that I've got it doing exactly what I want, I have to write it out to a file, right? So, and I almost forgot here. I need a PA4.1, right? Because that's where I'm putting all my files. Okay. So now it's going to create these files, right? In my whatever directory I tell it to, right? Your directory might be a little different, but it's going to write these files out to that directory using the string, whatever is in that string. So if I did this right, I saved it, come back over here. I'm going to run my command again. Actually, let me just clear the screen so that it's a little bit cleaner. Okay, I got a couple warnings, but PHP gives warnings all the time. In fact, if you don't like to see these warnings, you could turn them off, right? So in your PHP script, at the very top, the first thing you can do is and see if I have, yep, I got a little sample here I can copy in for you. That'll suppress the warnings, right? So then I don't have to see all that junk, and again, we're not writing a real application here, so I'm not really too concerned about the warnings. I just want to see any errors or fatal errors or anything like that. So sometimes they just get in the way. But in any event, so now I don't get any errors, right? And it should have written out those files. And if I come back over here, because I'm in that folder right now, and I refresh it, I should see, oh yeah, there it is. Insert other tables, right? It's right there. And create other tables. So if I click on this one, there's my create other tables, right? A whole bunch of stuff in there, right? I'm missing some of the comments in here, but oh, you know what? I know why we're missing the comments. It's because over here, we we need to do this as well. I mean, I could just modify the PHP script as well to account for the fact that I don't have these repeating in here, but it seems like a lot of work. So let's just do it this way. This way we will see some comments in here, right? All right. And I'll tell you what I'll do so you don't have to sit here and watch. I'll pause. All right, so I made that little change, and if I come back over here, I can push that file back up, right? So I'm just copying that same file back into my server. And if I come back over to my PowerShell and run it, then I come back over to here and take a look at the file again. There we go. So now I see the comments, right? That helps a little bit. Okay, so now I've got two options, right? I could either just copy the file down to my computer, and then I could just copy and paste, right? So I'm going to copy, come over here to my SQL Workbench, paste, and I could just run this, right? I could hit this little button right here, and it'll run this everything in this little script file, and that should work, right? That's one option. The other option is I could come back over here, and I could use the MySQL command to run it. So what I'll do for this first one is, since I already copy and pasted it, I'm just going to run it here, right? So I'll hit this little button up here, and it started to work, but it stopped right here. No database selected. All right, that's I actually warned everyone about that, right? So let's go back. We're going to do a new query. I'm just double clicking on college scorecard, so that's my selected database. So now that I've double clicked on that, it should run in college score. So again, I just double clicked on my database, and then now I can run the command over here. And now that I've done that, if I come over here, I can refresh all, and now I've got a whole bunch of tables. Now those tables have no data in them, right? So now to get data into those tables, again, I've got two options. One, I can just run MySQL. Hopefully this works. And I'm just going to put the name of the file that I want it to run, which should be, goodness, what did we call this file? It was insert. Yeah, it was insert other tables.sql. Oh, no database selected. So in the SQL script, you have to say use and then whatever the database table or the database name is. So I could do that, right? If I use the VI command, I can go into insert other tables, and I can hit I for insert, use college scorecard, hit escape, colon, WQ to quit. Okay, well, that was really fast. So I don't know if it did anything, but we can find out, right? If we, let's see which one of these had a lot of records in it. I think religious affiliation, that had a bunch. So if I, there we go. Ha, look at that, it worked. That was fast, right? It ran pretty quick, even on our wimpy little Google machines, which are only a fraction of a machine. Okay, so now we have these other tables in place. So we're done with the first part, right? We've got our other table set up. It has the data in it. Now we're ready for the next step. So what I want you to do is for the next deliverable, um, you're going to turn in a, and actually probably what makes the most sense is to just turn in a screenshot of MySQL Workbench, or if you want, you could turn in a screenshot over here. Just do from MySQL. So either in Workbench, you can show those tables on the left-hand side in the tree, and also with the record open for religious affiliation so we can see it. Or if you want to go into your database, if you don't have SQL Workbench, or maybe if Workbench isn't working for you, we're going to use college scorecard. Show tables. So you're going to show me that, and then maybe do another screenshot of select star from rel of fill. There you go. So you can just show me those two, and we'll be good. So again, you could do it from Workbench, or you could do it from here. Just make sure that your name is in there somewhere so I can see your name. So sometimes I'll just type my name down here at the bottom. So make sure your name appears. I got to see your name in the picture somewhere. But turn that in, and that'll be the first, or the second deliverable. And I'll pause this video, and then we'll do the next deliverable together.